What's going on YouTube? West Hobbies RC. So today we are starting the next rebuild series project after the one-of-a-kind Spitfire. We're going to do something a little different. So this is a SAPAC L-39 70mm. This was mine and I gave it to a good buddy of mine, Ed. He has flown it. It was his first EDF, but it was old, brand new but old, so all the covering was peeling off. Just the little tape lines and the colors were all peeling off, and it just, you know, it's old. It's probably 12 years old or so. So he's out of town, and I told him that I'll take the L-39 back and I will strip it down and we'll completely redo it. Fiberglass the wings, fiberglass the tail, do some work on it that we have to do. We're gonna have to make new little tip light covers. We are gonna put lights in this model, so I'll use this one as a mold. We'll make new light covers. We're going to end up pulling a new canopy because it's yellowed out and cracked. So we'll use this as a mold, vacuum form a new canopy, new bottom tray. We're going to fiberglass the wing panels with some 3/4 ounce cloth. The color is left over from the covering, but I'm going to sand it down. And as long as the epoxy will stick, then we're not going to worry about the color itself. We just have to get all this yellow sticker off and start repainting. So we're going to strip it all down first thing. We just have to pull all the stuff out of it. We're going to tape off everything we don't want to get painted. The fuselage has zero body work, which is really nice. Actually, it has one piece here on the rudder. So this is going to be the first thing we have to work on. Is the rudder ended up getting crushed and broken. So we cut the rudder, big panel out, put a carbon rod in it. And now the rudder is back to being strong. But now we just have to fix the body work. We have to paint all the little doors. We have to make a wingtip light for this one. That's the whole reason of the molds, because we need the wingtip lights. And we need a new canopy anyway, so might as well make them, can have it, pull it. If anybody ever needs one, sell them if need be. But first things first is we need to strip this thing down. So the main gear and servos are already out of the wing. Ed started doing this, so that we don't have to worry about. I did have to fix a little balsa in there for the wheel wells. But we need to get the nose gear out of here. And we need to get all this taped up, clean up the nose gear hole. This aircraft was built originally by somebody else, and they did not do a great job, but that's okay. We will fix it. So I'm going to cut to the time lapse, and I'm going to start disassembling this airplane and start getting all the yellow stickers off of it, and then we'll be back when we're ready to sand. Disassembling the entire aircraft, starting with the nose gear, then start with blue painter's tape and just regular white printer's paper. Going along, taping everything off, trying to keep the overspray to a minimum. You can disassemble it completely, but I didn't feel there was a need, as I felt like it got covered pretty good. So then we're going to start with taking the yellow stickers off that have been on there for many, many years. Started with heat, trying to get it off. Some of it worked, some of it did not. I grabbed a scraper here, trying to get the rest of the residue off. It ended up not working whatsoever. All right, so in the time lapse you guys just watched, I know I explain it, but we got rid of the yellow as much as we could. Super old stickers. It's about as good as it's going to get. I can use a little bit more heat and finish scraping, but they'll sand away. Sanding has started, 220 grit. Now the rudder, this is really the body work on the whole airplane. So the rudder was broken. It got crushed. So we had to cut a patch panel here to get in there and rebuild the formers, and then added a carbon rod that goes down to a piece of plywood inside the fuselage. So now the rudder is strong, and it's back strong, it's straight. But the problem is now we have a panel patch here that we have to fill back in. So I already started sanding it here. I sanded through the fiberglass a little bit, not a big deal. So now I'm going to go through with some Bondo and lay a line around all of this. And then I'll take my X-Acto knife while the Bondo is still wet, and I'll follow the panel lines because it does have panel lines on this aircraft. So I want to keep the panel lines the best I can. I know it's the rudder and you're not going to really be able to tell, but I would like to keep them. So while the Bondo is still wet, I'll just quickly take the X-Acto knife, cut through to follow the panel lines, and then I'm going to cut to the time lapse now of sanding the entire fuselage down. We will be using I take blue foam, pink foam, I cut it in half so the flat side's down. And of course, this is not going to be a true flat piece, but I like to do this as you can see the curve into it. from sanding, I like it to be squishable, and that way when I am sanding around edges, it will kind of form the edge. And then after a while, once they get tore up too bad, I just cut me a couple more blocks. And of course, if you're doing something straight, use a piece of metal or something that's straight for sandpaper, not a piece of foam like this. But this works great for doing around all this stuff and around all the edges. So we're gonna use 220 grit. We're gonna sand the entire thing down front to back with 220, and then we'll go ahead and lay Bondo and wait for that to dry. So I'm gonna cut to the time lapse of sanding everything down. A 220 grit sandpaper, dry sanding the entire fuselage down, a little bit of alcohol, and then here we're just using heat again to get rid of the covering. Works every time, a little method that I learned to let the glue go and doesn't leave a nasty residue. All right, so now we are going to start fiberglassing the stabs. So first things first, we have our Z-Epoxy fiberglass resin. This is what I like to use, either this or the West system, but the Z-Epoxy works really good, especially on foam. Doesn't eat any of the foam, so this is what I use for fiberglassing. We have just a regular red Solo cup, and it doesn't matter anything. I just like to mix it up. I use a little measuring cup to measure it, and then pour it into the cup, mix it all up. We have our 70% rubbing alcohol, because I will explain that in a minute, what we use the alcohol for with the epoxy resin. Just a regular brush. A little tip when you're going to fiberglass anything, you get 3 of these for $1 at the dollar store, but I like to grab the bristles and pull all the way around the brush. This gets rid of any of the loose bristles, so that way when you're fiberglassing and you're brushing the cloth, none of the bristles pop out and get in your resin and make a terrible job. Makes it hard to get out. These at the dollar store, I don't have the original packaging, but they come in a 1 inch, a 1 1/4, I believe, and a 1 3/4 inch. Don't hold me to that. I can't remember the exact sizes, but 3 for $1. Can't beat them. I buy a bunch of packs at a time, and they don't pull the bristles out really at all, so they work great for that. We are using 3/4 ounce fiberglass cloth. So I have already pre-cut my cloth, but this is 3/4 ounce cloth. Now, a little tip for you is I like to cut my cloth with the grain running 45. The reasoning for that is when you're going around the corners, it just behaves. And I'll explain that when we get to this part of it. And of course, popsicle stick really doesn't matter. Anything for mixing the resin with. And I like to have special scissors for fiberglass. As you can see, I wrote glass on it. This is just for fiberglass scissors. I have a special pair just for monocoat. I have a special pair for all purpose, but like especially with monocoat, a super sharp scissor is what you need. With fiberglass, you need a pair of scissors that are not only sharp, but a pair that you don't care about getting resin on, which I always clean them off anyways, but these are my designated fiberglass scissors. And make sure you don't get the fiberglass, so I use parchment paper just so the epoxy, if it drips, it doesn't get on my table. So I'm going to go ahead and mix the epoxy real quick, and then I'll be back after I mix it, because you have to mix it thoroughly. I don't want to bore you guys with 3 minutes of just me mixing. So let me mix the epoxy up, and then I'll explain the alcohol. All right, so I mixed my resin. Now I'm mixing up 7.5 milliliters of resin. So now I already mixed it all up. Now with the alcohol is 4. So I like to dilute my resin. This not only gets the air bubbles out, you'll watch it turn colors, but since I mixed up 7.5 milliliters, I am going to pour in an equal amount of alcohol. So we will go up to 15 milliliters. Now, this thins the resin out. The one thing about fiberglassing that everybody, now you can actually watch it turn white, and this is getting all the air out of the fiberglass and the moisture, mainly just the moisture, not really the air. But it's mainly getting all the moisture out of the resin, so now all the water is gone, and we have a nice thinned out, like water resin. That's what we want. We want a very thin resin. So now the purpose of this. So the purpose of this is that, sorry, I had to get a piece of paper towel. So the purpose of this is that you don't want a lot of resin. A very common mistake for fiberglassing is that when you fiberglass something, it's going to get heavy. And yes, that is true to a point. It can get heavy. So we're going to take our cloth, and like I said, I already pre-cut these. So we're just going to put this on until it lines up, and then we're going to push down. So we want to start in the middle and just work our cloth. Work our cloth all the way down and around. Okay, so that looks good there. So now we're going to take this that we already mixed up and we're going to pour that into our solo cup like that and scrape. So anyway, so the myth of fiberglassing is that it gets heavy. And while yes, that can be true to a point, you can make something extremely heavy because you are adding epoxy. It doesn't have to be heavy. You're not trying to fill the weave when you fiberglass something. You are just going to glue the cloth to the actual wood. A big mistake is people try to fill the weave. And I'm talking about the fiberglass weave, you know, the cloth. They're trying to fill it. And you're not trying to do that when you're fiberglassing. You are just trying to glue the piece of cloth down. So you really don't need a lot of fiberglass resin. So you're going to start in the middle and work your way out. You don't need a lot of resin. Now, the 45 I was talking about, when you get to these corners, it just behaves. The cloth, if any of you fiberglassed, you know what I'm talking about. When you get to certain corners, it just sucks. And the cloth does not want to go around. It doesn't want to bend. But when you cut it on 45s, the weave, it just goes right around the corner just beautifully. You just want to work your cloth, start in the middle, and just work your way. When I get to the edges, I like to go forward and so on. So you only need very, very little resin. So with that, it does not add much weight at all. If you fiberglass something correctly, it should only weigh around the same, if not a tiny bit more, than monocoating something. All the old pattern guys know it. They would always fiberglass all their airplanes. I'm a big fiberglass person. I'd rather cover it in cloth than monocoat it. I like monocoat, but fiberglass always looks good. So, and the way you know you got it good, you can tell it's not shiny. You can tell when you have some dark spots, like this leading edge is a little dark, but you don't want it to be shiny. If it's shiny, you have too much resin. Just as simple as that. And just like that, we have one piece fiberglass down. And you can kind of see it looks a little dull, which is what we want. We want it to be dull. That is perfect. It has just glued the cloth. We barely have any resin in our cup. I don't even know if you can see that, but there is very little resin in there. So now we are going to flip the airplane over. Let me grab another cloth here. Let me put my pieces aside, and another thing, you want to try to always keep your cloth clean. All right, so let me grab another cloth here. Can we still see the airplane? We can. Now we're going to grab our next piece that we have already pre-cut. And again, this is 3/4 ounce. So I like to just go through and push it all down. All right, that looks good. And again, we're just going to get the tip of our brush wet with the resin. And we're going to hold and push and drag. Push and drag, get it into the corners. Again, this cloth is cut on a 45. Now, if you're doing multiple layers of fiberglass, you always want to cross grain it, meaning so if you do one layer with the grain this way, you need to do the next layer with the grain this way, and so on and so forth as you go along. That'll give you the strongest joint with the least amount of actual resin and cloth. Now we're just going to very nice and carefully work the cloth down. It's always a very bad day when the cloth moves. That is not fun. It is fixable, but it's still not fun. And it's okay if we have a little excess here. We will trim that off when we're done. work any air bubbles out that you may get. And again, you don't want it to be shiny. The way it looks right now is perfect. And then you just kind of go through and work your corners. Add a little bit more resin if need be on your corners. See how much screwed up there? Moved, which we don't want. There's 100 different tricks to fiberglassing. You guys use what you know. If you don't know any, do a lot of research. Once you learn how to fiberglass, it's really, really nice because you can make some beautiful airplanes doing this. And you have a surface that is not only stronger, but you don't have to worry about the monocoat peeling off. Or doing like this airplane did. When the monocoat gets old, it looks like crap. And not only does it look like crap, it's a pain in the butt to get off, as you can tell from the wing on the beginning of the video. So now we have the other surface glued, and we still have used very little glass. So instead of doing this again for another 7 minutes, I'm gonna pause the video here, I'm gonna flip it over, do the other side, and I'll be back when this dries. Starting in the middle, working our way out, 3/4 ounce cloth. We're using Z-epoxy resin, same brush that we did with the tail. Went through about 10 milliliters of epoxy, which is not bad for a wing this size. Everything came out great. Okay, so the time lapse you guys just seen is of course me fiberglassing the top of the wing. Now, when the covering was peeled off the wing, there was no heat, so the color got stuck to the wood, and a lot of it would not come off. Tried to wipe it with some acetone, which made it worse. So always use heat to remove covering. It's a little tip I learned after this, so it is what it is. But sanded it down, the glass still sticks to it, no problem. Once it's primed, you'll never see it anyways. So we got the servo covers done, all covered in 3/4 ounce cloth. We got the top of the wing done. So now I'm gonna go ahead, flip the wing over, and start fiberglassing the bottom of the wing. And then we can move on to getting the tip tanks ready. And we're probably gonna make them, glue them on, and do a nice seamless transition to the two. I don't know yet, but we gotta get those ready for paint anyways. So I'm gonna start fiberglassing the bottom of the wing, and then I will be back. Alright, so we got the wing fully glassed, top and bottom. We cut all the control surfaces free, sanded everything. So now the wing is ready for primer, which is our next step. We got all the servo covers, fiberglass, 3/4 ounce cloth on everything. We got the tip tanks ready to be glued on and finish the body work. This one was sanded all the way down. This one I still need to get the yellow stickers, stripe tape stuff off. It is being a real pain, as you can see on the fuselage still, there's still a little left. But the elevators are fully fiberglassed and trimmed up and free sanded, ready for primer. So next, we are going to get some filler primer out. We're going to spray the wings, the servo covers, and then I'm going to glue these tip tanks on here and then prime everything at one time. I just want to get primer on the edges of these control surfaces so that way it's not visible when you go to give the aileron and you see ugliness under it. So now I'm going to clean everything off with rubbing alcohol and a microfiber rag, get all the dust off of it, all the sanding dust and stuff, and then spray it with a couple coats of filler primer, let it dry, wet sand it out, and we will see what it looks like. So we have primer down on the bottom of the wing. We have the aileron and flap servos covered in primer, and the stabs are covered in primer, top and bottom primered up. So now we still need to do the top of the wing. It is still just fiberglassed. We're gonna let this stuff dry out, wet sand it all out. Might have to do a second coat depending on how it looks after we wet sand it all. We're going to start with 220, then 400, then 800, see how it looks. We have to throw a second coat on, we will. But we're not going for show quality perfection with this build. We're going for more of a weathered jet look. You know, it's a jet. It's not supposed to look 100% perfect, but we're going to get it to look pretty damn good. So now we need to go ahead and sand out the little bit of Bondo on the bottom of the rotor, sand out the body filler on this side, finish scuffing the rest of the fuselage up. We need to finish getting all this yellow off of the nose and finish the little bit of body work on the bottom right there and there and get all that yellow off. So that's going to be a lot of fun, but I'm going to conclude part 1 here. So in part 2, we will finish the primer on the wing, get the fuselage in primer, and get this thing ready for paint. This is going to be a much shorter series than the one-of-a-kind Spitfire build, probably 3 to 4 parts, and we will have this jet finished up and back ready to fly again. So thank you guys so much for watching. This is a shorter video, but we got a little bit of work done. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And then part 2, we will continue on, get the fuselage in primer, finish the body work on the rudder, top of the wing in primer, get the wingtip tanks glued on and in primer, and then we can start with painting. So thank you guys so much for watching. Take care. Have a great day.